My name is Seth Ehorn. I teach in the Department of Modern and Classical Languages at Wheaton College. I research in Pauline studies and generally in New Testament studies, including the Hellenistic background of the New Testament.
Dr. Seth Ehorn. Seth, welcome back to Exegetically Speaking.
It's great to be here. Thanks, David.
We are just having a great time with this. I'm on Wheaton College campus. Get to see you face to face. See this beard's growing out really well, and
COVID beard.
COVID beard. A lot of people ended up with one of those. But you've been doing a lot of great work, and you're editing a very prestigious series of books that deal with the Greek text, coming out of Baylor University Press. Give us a little bit of a précis of that.
That's right. You're referring to the Baylor Handbook on the Septuagint, of which there are now 4 published volumes. 2 of them are my own on 2nd Maccabees. It was so large we divided it into 2. But you'll also find a handbook on Amos, published by Ed Glennie. There's a handbook on Zephaniah and Habakkuk. And there's one coming very early in 2024 by Jennifer Jones on Book 4 of the Psalms. So it's an early series, but it's growing with a lot of momentum.
So a person who's been studying Greek for a while could pick up one of those, and they could sit down with 2nd Maccabees or Amos, the Septuagint version of Amos, and let's say kind of read those together and be helped by the handbook itself.
That's right. These are designed to help you read the Greek text in particular. And I can tell you, having worked through 2nd Maccabees, many people will need the help. So go get the book, and it'll help you work through what is, I think, some of the more challenging Greek of the Septuagint.
Okay.
Especially at that intermediate or post-intermediate level, it's quite useful.
Okay. Well, good. Well, a number of people, I think, who listen to the podcast would be eligible and could find great use out of that volume. So thanks much. Yeah. Today we're going to talk about Philemon, which you can't say chapters and verses exactly, just Philemon verse 2, right?
That's right.
At least the way it was versified for us a long time ago. So this is the introduction where Paul is introducing himself. He's already done so as a prisoner for Christ. And Timothy, our brother, he appears to be with him writing this letter, right? So, and now he gives the address. To whom is he writing? And you're looking particularly at verse 2. Let's talk a little bit about that.
That's right. So there are actually 4 people that are addressed: Philemon, Apphia, but I'm most interested in Archippus, the 3rd person addressed. And he is defined as our fellow soldier, so to stratiote hemon. And that's a particular word that Paul only uses one other time in Philippians chapter 2 to refer to another co-worker or co-laborer. And so I began to just think about, what does this mean? Is it a term like sunergos, co-laborer, fellow worker, or does it have a particular nuance that might be more meaningful in both Philemon 2 and in Philippians 2?
So your research, looking into the background of that, where did it take you?
Yeah. There was actually a number of places I had to go, including the Thesaurus Lingua Graecae, to look at the whole range of this word's use in extant literature in the Greco-Roman period. I also went and looked at uses in papyri. So there's a great database called the Duke Database of Online Papyri, as well as epigraphic sources, so things etched in walls and whatnot. And you can find soldier terminology and even this precise word, soustratiotes, in each of those sources with different levels of frequency, but it's everywhere. Yeah.
So what was your sort of end game at this? You were interested, I guess, in just the overall background and what's happening in the letter, right?
That's right. So I became increasingly frustrated by either one of 2 scenarios. Commentators, scholars, basically ignoring the word altogether. It receives no comment at all. If it does get a comment, it's one of 2 things. It's either just a generic martial metaphor where Paul, other places uses military language and ideas, so that's just what's going on here. And then it's immediately, let's move on to the next topic. Or it's just treated as if it were a synonym with his other words for co-laborers. So as if it meant the same thing as fellow worker or sunergoi in Greek. And I don't think either of those explanations was satisfying to me. The first reason being, it's a rare word, right? Paul only deploys it twice. So to call it a synonym of a word he uses with a lot more frequency seems to sort of cut against the evidence.
And in Philippians,
Yeah.
it refers to Epaphroditus.
That's right.
Who's really a key figure in that whole story.
Right. And Epaphroditus in Philippians 2 is called a sunergos. So he is a fellow worker with Paul, a fellow worker of God with Paul. But then Paul also calls him a fellow soldier, a soustratiotes. And in Philippians 2, the nuance of that word seems quite clear. Paul will immediately start to talk about how Epaphroditus has suffered with Paul. He's gotten sick. He's come to the point of death. And when you look at soldier language and the sort of topos of soldiers in antiquity, that's one of the main nuances that emerges is suffering for a cause. So that seems to be very clearly rhetorically what Paul is doing with that moniker, fellow soldier, in Philippians 2. But if we take that meaning over to Philemon, I'm not sure it emerges there. And so
as one who suffers.
As one who suffers
cause.
for a cause, right? And it's not that that couldn't work there, but Paul doesn't say anything about Archippus suffering. That doesn't seem to be active in his mind as he's writing this letter. And so I had to press forward and say, what could be going on here?
So what did you end up concluding about that?
Yeah. Well, it seems to me, based upon the wider features of the letter to Philemon, that there is a very clear sense of why Paul might be talking about soldiers. Okay. Soldiers are involved in the Roman world, particularly outposted soldiers, in the capturing and returning of slaves.
Runaway slaves.
Runaway slaves.
Okay.
So that provides a really provocative, as you might imagine, sense for what Paul could be doing with this term. Because if he's a soldier on the receiving end, he's got the slave with him, and he's writing to some people on the other end who are going to be receiving the slave once he's sent him back. Now we have fellow soldiers on the sending and receiving end of things.
So Paul is like a soldier too, in a way, functioning because he's had this former slave.
That's right.
Runaway slave. He's actually brought him into the fellowship of the family of Christ, right, the brotherhood of Christ. Right. And yet he's now sending it to another one who is an actual soldier, not just one who...
He could be a soldier.
Could be a real soldier.
I think it could be, though, both with Paul. It's clearly a metaphor with Paul.
Right.
I think it could also be a metaphorical use
it could be.
With Archippus.
So Archippus may not be a member of the church who is in the military in some ways.
Yeah, I don't think it has to be read that way.
Okay.
Just as with Epaphroditus, we wouldn't say, oh, well, he's definitely a real soldier.
Sure,
I think Paul could just be making a metaphor and saying, you're the member of this Pauline community whom I'm sending this person to, and in that sense, you're functioning like a soldier, just as Paul is functioning like a soldier on the sending end.
I see. Yeah, very good. So how does this help us understand the whole sort of background, what's happening in the letter? Is Onesimus a runaway slave?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are various interpretations of the context of the letter. And in recent years, one interpretation has moved us away from the runaway slave theory. It's called the amicus domini theory, the friend of the master theory. And that theory presumes that Onesimus hasn't run away, but has left with the intention of finding Paul to get intercession from Paul.
To get help from Paul.
To get help from Paul, yeah. Right. But despite its popularity, I think there are a lot of problems with that, which we don't have to go into today. But suffice it to say, the kind of reading that I'm talking about here reinforces the traditional reading, the idea that Onesimus has run away, and Paul is actually performing multiple kinds of service, but one of them in this is sending him back to his master in a way that would be viewed from the master's perspective as compliant, which I think works with larger aspects of the letter as well. Paul talks about acting in deference to Philemon. Right? I want to do this, but I don't want to coerce you. I want what you to do to be voluntary. So it works with those larger themes in the letter as well.
So you're writing a commentary on Philemon for Lexham Press. Is this going to be something we can read about in that commentary?
Yeah, this will make some appearance in the commentary. Not all of the details will show up there in the same way, but I'm also giving a paper on this at the 2023 SBL Historical Paul section, and I'm hoping to also turn this into an article that will go out to hopefully some top-tier journal.
Fantastic. This is a great reading. Really interesting take on this word that I have just sort of read through and read over instead of really reading down into it and getting into the content of it. But Dr. Seth Ehorn, thanks for being with us today on Exegetically Speaking.
My pleasure.
Hey, thanks again to Seth Ehorn for being with us here on Exegetically Speaking. It really was exploring some things I've not thought about. I just kind of read over, but very interesting use of that language soustratiote as a reference to Archippus there in the letter. Pretty interesting stuff. So anyway, thank him for that. If you have a question or if somebody you would like to interview, or maybe you're a scholar out there say, why haven't you talked to me? Okay, we got you. Why don't you email me or email us at exegetically.speaking@wheaton.edu. That's exegetically.speaking@wheaton.edu. Be in touch. Tell us what you're thinking, and we'll be back in touch with you. Maybe even record a session or two related to your comments and your thoughts. If you want to study biblical languages, Wheaton College is the best place, bar none, wheaton.edu. Please look us up. Look for modern and classical languages if that's your interest at an undergraduate level. But if you're a graduate student, there's also a Master of Arts in Biblical Languages here. So check that out too as well. It is my privilege to be a part of this podcast. I'm David Capes. I'm down at the Lanier Theological Library in Houston, and we love what's happening here at Wheaton. Thanks for listening.